really sad case of April Holt.
A young mother and a social media influencer.
Exactly. And all our info for this deep dive is coming from Kendall Ray's YouTube channel.
Specifically that video she did about April's case, yeah.
Now, this case is super interesting. It was first ruled a suicide, but
But then it gets reclassified as a homicide.
because of April's mom, Jamie, she just would not give up.
Incredible.
So we're going to uncover some pretty surprising things, like about April's life, what led to her death.
And the fight for justice.
For sure.
Really, really powerful stuff.
So let's start by getting to know April, from her TikToks and what Jamie has shared.
Yeah. She comes across as super vibrant, like running her own business.
A lash business, right?
Yeah, and creating all this positive content, just like radiating joy.
But more than that, she was super dedicated to her kids.
Serenity and Denzel. And that dedication really shows in her choice to homeschool Denzel, because of his Tourette syndrome.
Oh, wow.
And taking that on top of everything else, that's a huge commitment.
Totally. It shows what an amazing mom she was. So now April's relationship with Donovan, her husband then, is a little complicated.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, online they seemed super strong, like the perfect couple.
Right. But there were signs, right? They'd separated and then got back together.
Yeah, and some of April's TikToks, kind of hinted that things weren't great.
Oh, interesting.
And those hints line up with what Jamie, April's mom, was seeing too. Like, she started noticing these red flags.
Oh, like what?
Donovan being really possessive
Uh-huh.
and trying to keep April away from her friends and family.
Oh, wow.
And then there were constant money problems.
Oh, no.
And rumors that he wasn't honest about bills and stuff.
Yikes.
And, whenever they were together, Jamie could just feel the tension.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy how different things can be online versus real life, huh?
Totally.
Now, the day of the tragedy, Jamie was at this church lock-in thing.
Yeah.
And she had planned to see the Barbie movie with April the next day.
Oh, that's sweet. Shows how close they were.
Right. It just makes the whole thing so much more awful.
Yeah. Sure.
But then April had to cancel because of Denzel's football game.
Oh, right.
And Donovan was at work. So April stayed home with Denzel, like any mom would.
Yeah.
So sad, all the normal things that were taken from her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, later that day, Jamie gets this horrible call from Donovan. April was unresponsive, not breathing.
Oh, God.
Yeah. They rushed her to the hospital and put her on life support. But by the time Jamie got there,
She was too late.
pretty much. And there were bruises on her neck and ankles.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And even broken blood vessels in her cheeks.
Yeah.
So right away, Jamie knew something was really, really wrong.
Her mom instincts kicked in.
For sure. And that's where Jamie's determination really comes in,
To find out the truth.
Exactly. And that initial story, the one Donovan told,
Yeah.
it just didn't make sense.
Okay, so what did he say happened?
So he said April had been in the shower, for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And when she didn't answer, he asked Denzel, their son, to check on her.
Oh, my God. No, you don't send a kid in there.
I know, right? It's messed up.
Yeah.
And what Denzel found was just horrible. April was unresponsive, and she had a trash bag duct taped over her head.
Oh, that's just awful.
Yeah. But even with all that, Donovan's story was full of holes. He waited to call 911.
What?
And he didn't even mention the trash bag until Jamie got to the hospital.
That's so suspicious.
Right. All those inconsistencies, plus what they saw in April's body. It made Jamie even more determined to find out what really happened.
It's clear there's way more to this story.
For sure. And as we'll see, Jamie's fight for the truth led to some shocking discoveries. She had to take on a system that just didn't seem to care.
Wow. I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
You know what's really crazy about this case? It could have so easily been brushed aside as a suicide, if Jamie hadn't been so insistent.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about how many cases April's might just slip through the cracks, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the way the police handled it initially really raises some red flags.
Big time. The assumptions, the lack of a real investigation.
And even the autopsy, there are allegations of interference there too.
Wait, what do you mean?
So apparently a detective gave the medical examiner a biased account of what happened.
No way. That's not right at all. A detective shouldn't be influencing the medical examiner's findings. That's not their job.
It points to a real lack of objectivity, and that can have huge consequences for victims and their families.
It's just not right. And it wasn't just the police, right? Jamie had problems with the legal system, too.
Oh, yeah, totally. She had to deal with 3 different district attorneys. And the first 2, totally disrespectful, like unprofessional, you know?
Oh, man. It's so disheartening to hear stories like that.
Yeah. It's like adding insult to injury, you know?
Totally. It's amazing that Jamie didn't just give up.
Seriously. But thankfully, it sounds like she's finally found a district attorney who's like on her side, you know?
That's good to hear. Someone who's
Right.
actually listening to her.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's willing to fight for April.
And it's not just about justice for April, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jamie's doing so much more, like that grief center she's opening. Grieve With Me, I think it's called.
It's amazing, right? And she's really raising awareness about domestic violence, too.
Yeah, she's sharing April's story and all the signs that she missed. Hopefully that'll help other people, you know.
Totally. It's like education is key, right, to preventing these tragedies.
Exactly. And she's sharing some really, really shocking statistics. Did you know that only like half of the people who are strangled show physical symptoms?
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's crazy. It means like so much abuse goes completely unnoticed.
It's so scary to think about.
And Jamie's not just talking about it, you know. She's pushing for real change, too. Like, she wants the police to be involved in every case where a domestic partner is involved and someone's, you know, unresponsive.
That makes sense. It takes away that delay that happened in April's case, right?
Right. And she's also pushing for changes in the way autopsies are done to keep detectives from, you know, influencing the result.
It's all about keeping things objective, right? Letting the medical evidence speak for itself.
Exactly. It's incredible. Like, Jamie's become an investigator, an advocate, a policy reformer, and now with the Grief Center, like a support system for others who are grieving.
She's amazing, turning such a horrible loss into something positive.
And she's doing all of this while, you know, dealing with her own grief, raising her grandkids, and keeping April's memory alive. She even watches April's TikTok videos, you know, to feel close to her.
Oh, that's really touching.
That's pretty powerful. And, you know, even in the midst of all this sadness, there's this beautiful act of generosity. April's organs saved 4 lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a real testament to who she was, you know?
Absolutely. It shows that even in death, her light continues to shine. And speaking of light, you know, I think that's a good image to keep in mind as we wrap up this deep dive. It's been heavy, emotional.
Oh, frustrating time.
But, like, there's also this thread of hope running through it all.
Yeah, definitely. It's a story about darkness and light, you know?
Right.
About loss and love, about injustice and fighting for what's right.
Exactly. And before we share our final thoughts, I want to remind everyone about the resources that Jamie talked about. The National Domestic Violence Hotline for anyone experiencing abuse.
And Jamie's Grief Center, Grieve With Me. It's a great resource for anyone dealing with loss.
We'll have links to both in the show notes.
Really important to offer these lifelines, you know, for anyone who might be struggling.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to our closing thoughts, is there anything else that stands out to you about this case, something that we haven't touched on that you think our listeners should, like, really think about?
Well, one thing that really struck me was how, like, social media played this kind of, like, double role, you know?
Yeah, totally. On the one hand, it was how April was showing this perfect picture of her relationship.
Right. It was hiding what was really going on.
Like a mask.
Yeah.
Almost. It's a good reminder that what we see online,
Yeah.
you know, it's not always the whole story.
Exactly. But then on the other hand, social media was how Jamie got her voice out there.
Yeah, to fight for April.
Right. She used it to challenge that whole suicide narrative and demand a real investigation.
So it's like social media was both the problem and the solution.
Kinda, yeah. It's wild how the same platform can be used for, like, totally opposite things.
It really makes you think about how we, like, consume information online, you know? Got to be careful about taking things at face value.
Totally agree. Especially with, like, you know, people's online personas and all that.
And speaking of being careful, I think it's worth mentioning how Jamie handled that gag order. Like, even though she couldn't talk about the case publicly, she still found a way to get her message across.
Oh, right. With that tape over her mouth and her TikToks?
Yeah. It was, like, symbolic, you know? It showed how she was being silenced, but it also, like, amplified her fight for justice.
It was brilliant, and it totally worked, too. It brought even more attention to the case.
She turned a restriction into, like, this powerful statement.
Exactly. It shows how determined she was to be heard, even when the system was trying to shut her down.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into April Holt's case, what do you think are the biggest takeaways for our listeners?
Well, for me, it's a reminder to be, like, really critical of what we see online. Not everything is as it seems.
Absolutely. And to trust our gut, right? If something feels off, it probably is.
Yeah, and to find our own voice, to speak up for what we believe in, even when it feels impossible.
It's also a really, really important reminder about how common domestic violence is.
And that we need to keep talking about it, keep raising awareness, educating people, and making sure there's support for victims.
For sure. April's story shows just how crucial it is to recognize the signs of abuse and to know where to go for help.
Resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline are literally lifesavers.
Yeah, they are. And we can't forget about the amazing work Jamie's doing with her grief center, Grieve With Me. Like, she's taking her pain and turning it into something that helps others.
It's a real tribute to April,
Mhm.
and shows how you can find healing even after something so awful.
As you go about your day, we hope you keep April's story with you. Remember her energy, her love for her kids, and how tragically her life was cut short. Remember Jamie's strength, her courage, and her relentless fight for justice. But most importantly, remember that each of us can play a part in making the world safer, so these stories don't have to happen anymore.
If you were moved by this deep dive, please check out the links in the show notes. You can learn more about April's case, support Jamie's work, and think about how you can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.